Hello, my name is Zachary Wagner, and I will be doing a video on best practices for hardening an operating system and firewalls. This is for an ISA4220 System Security Level 2 for Professor Green. The operating systems and firewalls that are going to be implemented in the class are going to be, we have a Microsoft Server 2012, which is a standard 64-bit server, and an Ubuntu Server 17.10 LTS. The firewalls used on both of these devices is the Windows firewall and the IP tables firewall for Linux. Next, I'd like to go into some definitions. So an operating system is the software that supports a computer's basic functions. For example, you're scheduling tasks, it's executing applications, and it's controlling the peripherals such as your mouse and keyboards. A firewall is a part of a computer system or a network that is designed to block unauthorized access while permitting outward communication. This is done through setting filters to block traffic. You have two main types of firewalls. You have your software firewalls, which are for standalone machines, which only protect the device that it's installed upon. This is commonly found on your desktops, and most servers will have a standard firewall that comes with it. And you also have hardware firewalls, which are sort of a separate machine, but they're built into the network and they protect all of the devices that are on that network. So all the traffic will go through these actual physical firewalls before getting sent to the physical servers. First, I'd like to talk about some hardening techniques and recommendations for Windows, the Windows Server. First, you want to do the user configurations, meaning that you want to set a new password, get it off the default password, and you want to configure your password settings, like how long you want the password set to, and how often the password needs to change, and what characters that are required. Next, you want to go into the network configuration. For production servers, you want to make sure it has a static IP address so that clients will be able to find them. And these IP addresses should be behind a protected segment, meaning like behind a firewall of some sort. And you want to, for these production servers, you want to configure two DNS servers so that way you have a redundancy if one of the domain name services server goes down, the other one is still running, so that way your clients can still access your servers to do business. And you also want to disable any network services that the server won't be using. This is important because if you have any services or even applications that the server is not using, it is allowing unnecessary risk to attack through those services or applications. So there's no point in having them. Next, you want to go into your Windows feature and roles configuration. You want to make sure that everything you need is installed and anything you don't is uninstalled. For that same reason, you don't want that unnecessary risk to attack through anything that you have installed on there that's not being used. You also want to make sure you keep the server updated. Of course, it seems almost common sense, but sometimes there's always people who don't realize that you need to make sure it's updated. And you want to allow you want to do it as quickly as possible, but you still want to allow proper testing for the updates before you install it, just in case the updates cause any major problems. And there are three main types of updates. You have patches, which are typically to address a single vulnerability. Then you have roll-ups, which are to protect against a group of vulnerabilities. Typically, they're related. And then you have your service packs, which are a update to provide to protect against a wide range of vulnerabilities. anywhere from a dozen to hundreds of individual patches. Next, you have you want to make sure you have your network time protocol configured. Um, this is best done by connecting to a time server, so that way it can remain accurate. Um, if your time isn't kept accurate, it can break the Windows the logins and other functions that rely on Kerberos security. And if you're connected to a domain controller, you want to make sure that controller is synced up to a time server as well. Just again, so that way you have that functionality so it doesn't shut your system down or prevent people from logging in or connecting to a server because the time protocol isn't set properly. Next, you have your firewall configuration. For the Windows server, you're going to have Windows Firewall, which is what we're using for the class. And you want to make sure you set the active ports on the server. So if it's a web server, you're only going to be wanting to use ports 80 and 443. And if you have any other ports open, it's just unnecessary and it adds a security risk for having open ports. And if you have any other functions on the server, such as RDP for management, you want to make sure it's connected through a VPN. And Windows Firewall pretty much allows you configuration of port-based traffic from when the operating system, again, just sort of allowing these ports to be open and allow traffic through these ports, but nothing else through any of the ports that aren't. And this it provides some protection against network-based attacks, but it pretty much limits the attack surface allowed on those ports. So you only have those for, like, again, for a web server, you only have ports 80 and 443. Those are the only ports that can be attacked if those are the only ports available. Typically, you want to use a hardware firewall just because it offloads the traffic onto another device and offers more options on handling that traffic, and it leaves that server to perform the main task. Next, you have your remote access configuration. This is now going again to RDP, which is Remote Desktop Protocol. You want to make sure it's only accessible to authorized users. Again, probably want to do this through a VPN. And as by default, all admins are allowed to use RDP once it's enabled on the server. So if you want that to change, you'll have to go into the settings and change that. And additionally, you don't have to have somebody be an admin to have that access to the remote, the RDP. You can go into the remote desktop user group and add that user to that instead of creating them as an admin, just for an extra layer of security. And then again, any other remote access mechanisms such as PowerShell and SSH should be carefully locked down if they're not being used, or if they are, be used through a VPN. Next, you want to go into your service configurations. For Windows servers, they have default services that start automatically and run in the background. Most of these services are required for the operating system to function, but some are not, and you should disable them. Again, for that same reason, you don't want anything running that can lead to an attack, especially if you're not using it. Some important services, so any important services that you have running on the machine, you should set to start automatically. So if that machine has a failure and it does an automatic restart, when it comes back online, it can recover, so that way you don't have to have a human interaction reopening applications or services for you to be back in business. Um, so some further hardening options. Microsoft provides some best practice analyzers, um, which they're sort of based on what roles that server is doing and the version that that server is. And they can help further harden your system by scanning and making recommendations to you to help secure that server. You also want to make sure you have your proper logging and monitoring services um, set up. You want to, and this is because you want to make sure you capture the data you want, so that way, if there is an event that occurs from an attack, you can quickly find what you need to and remediate from it and come back online. And you want to monitor it so that way you have a log of what happened, when the attack occurred, or when it was noticed, and all of that stuff. Now moving on to our Ubuntu server. Again, you want to make sure you set a strong password. Can't stress that enough. If you don't have a strong password, it makes it very easy and acceptable to attack. And you want to make sure you also get it off the default password. You want to make sure you use a disk encryption, which enables encrypted logical volume management, or LVM, during the installation of your Ubuntu server. You want to enable that right away, because that prevents, if an attacker gains access to the hardware or steals the disk and the physical hardware, it prevents them from being able to just plug in and retrieve that information, because they'll have to have the key to be able to do that. And next, you want to automate your security updates. They have this option in there during the configuration to install your security updates automatically. And this ensures that it's regularly patched and updated, but you still want to make sure you regularly check on the updates, because some of those updates will require a restart, and it will not happen automatically. It takes a user input to restart it. And that can be crucial, because a lot of companies just let that server have it automatically set up for updates, but they forget to go back and check for any updates that require a restart, uh, which can be a problem because you're still vulnerable to those attacks. Um, Next, Ubuntu installation. So when you're setting it up, has dramatically improved. So it only installs sort of what is needed, um, and doesn't install anything it doesn't. But you want to make sure you install any other packages or softwares that you want to run on the server. Um, so if you want SSH for remote access and to be able to execute commands, you'll want to make sure that that's installed, but you also want to make sure that it's through a VPN. Next, you have your user accounts, and this is sort of where you want to make sure you have a password policy set and told to your users what that policy is, and any accounts that are no longer needed, that they're deleted. So if somebody quits, gets fired, or switches jobs, goes to a different company, you want to make sure that access is cut off immediately, so that way no harm can be done. Um, Next, you want to make sure you configure your pluggable authentication module, which is called PAM. This control is this controls the password quality, which allows you to set the minimum password length, your complexity, sort of what characters you want, and how often the password should be changed. Next is your firewall installation and configuration, again using the IP tables. It is important to install the firewall on the individual server and to have the network as a whole. And this is to protect the system against other systems that are in the local subnet that may be compromised. So if your server A is compromised, it can't easily jump over to server B that's within the network and within that firewall, because you have an individual firewall set on those individual servers. Um, Another reason again is to block bad traffic. So if it's coming from if it's an encrypted source like from an HTTPS, um, it can sometimes get through your hardware firewall, um, and then get to the server, and then that server, if you have that firewall set, once it unencrypts that information or that packet, it sees that, okay, that packet is bad, so it can then block it, where the hardware firewall might miss it because that packet's encrypted and it can't tell that it's a bad packet. Next, you want to make sure you set up your AppArmor security framework. This framework sort of defines what running processes can do and or access. And I'm going to talk more about this next video. And finally, you want to make sure you configure your backups and monitoring services sort of for the same reason. For the Windows servers, you want to make sure if there was an attack, you're monitoring what happened and you have your backup to come back online as quickly as possible. Here's sort of some of the sources I use, and I just want to say thank you guys for listening in, and I hope you guys have a good day.